Hello. We shall discuss on the socio-political context of White Sargasso Sea. The setting of White Sargasso Sea is Jamaica, mostly the Jamaica. The very last section of the novel is set in Thornfield Hall, which is in England. Mostly it is post-emancipation Jamaica. Post-emancipation Jamaica would mean the time after the Slavery Abolition Act or the Emancipation Act was enacted. The Emancipation Act was enacted in 1833. This act granted freedom to the slaves in all the colonies of England. Before coming to the context of this post emancipation Jamaica, you need to know the situation of the pre colonial Jamaica. Initially, it was called as Jamaica, Xamaica, and the Aborigine people were there were a few Aborigine tribes like Arawak, Tainos, Caribs. You know that Christopher Columbus discovered this Jamaica in 1498. Immediately after this, Jamaica became a Spanish colony and it remained a Spanish colony till 1655 when Britain took over it, and most parts of Jamaica remained a British colony till 1962. A certain portion of this Jamaica became a French colony when they occupied those portions in 1655. And Martinique, one section named Martinique, is still a French colony. So you see, because of this multiple colonizers, there were during this post emancipation period whites from several parts of Europe. They were French, they were British, there were Spanish, even Scottish, Irish. So Jamaica in post-emancipation period was a complex multi-ethnic zone. First of all, there were whites, European whites, then Afro-Jamaican blacks. Who were Afro-Jamaican blacks? They were transported to Jamaica as the slaves. And there were a very few aborigines left because of the constructive genocide done by this Spanish colonists and the diseases that came from Europe. So very few Tainos, Arawaks, and Caribs were there, or in general, they are called as Indians. Along with them, along with this Afro Jamaican blacks, non uh, non British whites and British whites, and a very few Aboriginal people, there were also mulattoes or Creoles. Creoles would mean the people of mixed racial origin, of European and Jamaican racial origin, or European and African racial origin. So, blacks in Jamaica, as I have already said, most of the blacks in Jamaica were transported as slaves. For example, in 1517, by the order of Charles V of Spain, 4,000 slaves were transported to Jamaica. And you can also come across the name Maroons. These Maroons were actually runaway slaves who fled away from their slavery and lived in the mountains, and often they attacked the colonizers. Now, Creoles need a bit more focus. You see, in Jane Eyre, Edward Rochester specified that this Bertha Mason's mother was a Creole, was a Jamaican Creole to be particular. And you know that The mother of Jean Rees was a third generation Dominican Creole. Dominican Creole would mean she was a French Creole. Now, in general, Creole has a linguistic connotation. Creole language would mean a language that is made up of two or more languages. But in Jamaican context or the context of West Indies, Creole would mean an individual of mixed racial origin, of European and Jamaican Indians or blacks. They were often called mulattoes. Particularly Edward Long in his The History of Jamaica has referred repeatedly these Creoles as mulattoes or the people of mixed racial origin. Now, because they were of mixed racial origin, of European and non European racial origin, they could be of color, that means they could be black, and they could be brown, and they could be whites. In general, we divide Creoles in two categories, black Creoles and white Creoles. In white Sargasso Sea, you can find the focus is on the white Creoles. There were a very few numbers of white Creoles in that post-emancipation times. Irrational it may seem, but these white Creoles were much more victimized than the black Creoles because of their white color. The blacks hated these white Creoles because of their white color. Now, black Creole could easily mingle with the blacks. Now, these white Creoles could not equate themselves with the white colonizers or the blacks even, and they were hated by the blacks. These white Creoles were often called as the white cockroach by the blacks and even the whites. This Emancipation Act that I have already discussed, or the Slavery Abolition Act, this was passed by the British Parliament in 1833, and this act granted freedom to all the slaves of the British colonial territories. Now, because of this act was published, the slave owners were expected to get a compensatory amount. But if you read White Sargasso, you realize that this compensatory amount did never come to these ex-slave owners. Now, what was the consequence of emancipation? Let me tell you that this during this time, or it had been quite in general, this West Indies or Jamaica has been a source of sugar. There is or there had been a strong market of sugar plantation. Now, during this time, most of the sugar planters were non British whites and white Creoles or Creoles in general. According to William James Gardner, most of the planters were non British whites, non British Europeans, and Creoles, white Creoles in particular. So, immediately after the enactment of this Slavery Abolition Act, the slaves started to attack their ex-masters. The ex-slaves started to attack their ex-masters, and if you read White Sargasso, you realize that it is the portrayal of a white Creole family who were the planters, and they were the plantation merchants, and they were being attacked repeatedly by their ex-slaves. Another thing is that this ex-slaves, they were because these ex-slaves stopped working for many planters. The British colonizers took that opportunity and usurped many of the properties of the plantation merchants. If you read White Sargasso, you will realize that there were several opportunists uh, tried to grab the wealth of the plantation owners using that scope. Okay, thank you.